the forbidden black religion before Yahweh, hidden from history. Most of what we think we know about God is just the tip of the iceberg. Long before Yahweh became the central figure of faith, ancestral black religions in Africa were shaping the spiritual landscape of humanity. These traditions were rich with gods representing life, death, love, and creation, and their rituals, ranging from sacred dances and drumming to intricate symbols, carried deep meaning. Every river, star, and mountain had significance, and ancestors were seen not as gone, but as living guides and protectors. Over time, much of this knowledge was suppressed, erased, or rewritten by dominant powers seeking to control spiritual narratives. Yet even today, faint echoes survive, hidden in stories, rituals, and symbols across the world. Understanding this history not only reconnects us to forgotten wisdom, but also challenges the story of God, as we've been told for centuries too. Long before written history recorded their existence, the spiritual roots of Africa thrived in the lands of Kush, Nubia, and ancient Egypt. These ancient civilizations weren't just architectural marvels, they were centers of profound spiritual wisdom. Every belief was deeply connected to nature. Rivers, trees, and the stars were seen as living parts of the cosmic order. Ancestors weren't considered gone. They transformed into spiritual energy, guiding and protecting their descendants at every step. People turned to them for wisdom, courage, and balance in daily life. Spiritual practice was vibrant and immersive. Fire wasn't just warmth, it symbolized life and renewal. Drums echoed the heartbeat of communities, connecting humans to divine rhythms. Dance expressed devotion and called upon the energies of gods and spirits. Oral traditions, stories, songs, and chants ensured that knowledge and sacred wisdom were passed down through generations. This was a living, breathing spirituality where humans, nature, and the cosmos were inseparably intertwined, forming a harmony that modern society is only beginning to rediscover and appreciate. Core beliefs. In ancient African spiritual traditions, everything in nature was sacred. The sun that rose each day, the moon that lit the night, flowing rivers, twinkling stars, and even the animals roaming the land were all seen as expressions of divine energy. Life was interconnected, and respect for these elements was central to daily existence. The gods of these traditions represented the fundamental forces of life: fertility to sustain generations, war to defend and protect, love to unite communities, death to transform and renew, and prosperity to bless abundance. Above all these deities existed a supreme creative force, a power that encompassed everything and hinted at the early concept of a singular God, long before monotheistic religions codified it. Women played pivotal roles in this spiritual ecosystem. They were not only life-givers but also guardians of sacred knowledge, spiritual leaders, and healers. Their wisdom and connection to both nature and the divine gave them immense influence in guiding communities. Rituals, ceremonies, and teachings revolved around these beliefs, blending reverence for nature with the understanding of cosmic order. The core philosophy was simple yet profound. Humans, nature, and the divine are inseparably linked, and living in harmony with this interconnected web brings balance, protection, and spiritual growth. Even today, echoes of these beliefs remind us of a time when spirituality was deeply rooted in everyday life, honoring both the visible and invisible forces that shape existence. Symbols and rituals. In ancient African spiritual traditions, art was never just decoration. It was a bridge to the divine. Masks, amulets, sculptures, and paintings carried profound spiritual significance, each crafted to channel energy, protect communities, and honor the gods. These objects weren't static. They were living tools, connecting people directly to the unseen forces shaping their world. Music and dance formed another essential part of spiritual life. Drumming, in particular, was considered the heartbeat of the cosmos, creating vibrations that opened portals to spiritual realms, allowing humans to communicate with ancestors and deities. Dance was both devotion and invocation, a physical expression of prayer and cosmic connection. Beyond music and performance, visual and symbolic systems played critical roles. Body painting, intricate sacred geometry, and cosmic calendars guided rituals, tracked celestial cycles, and offered spiritual protection. Patterns painted on the skin or etched into artifacts weren't random. They encoded stories, cosmic knowledge, and ethical guidance. Communities used these symbols to teach, preserve, and invoke sacred wisdom, passing knowledge from generation to generation. Together, these practices created an immersive spiritual ecosystem where humans, nature, and the divine interacted in constant dialogue. They reminded people that the sacred was all around them, in the rhythm of drums, the colors of a mask, the patterns in the stars, and the gestures of a ritual dance. Even today, the remnants of these symbols and practices continue to inspire and connect us to a deeply rooted spiritual heritage that modern society is only beginning to understand. Influence on later religions. The spiritual traditions of ancient Africa left an indelible mark on religions that followed. Egyptian gods such as Isis, Osiris, and Ra, for instance, weren't isolated deities. They carried centuries of wisdom from ancestral black religions, embodying creation, resurrection, justice, and cosmic order. These traditions didn't stay contained in Egypt. Across Mesopotamia, Sumerian myths show striking similarities, with stories of divine beings, creation from clay, great floods, and miraculous resurrections. Even the Bible and other later religions absorbed these ideas. Concepts like sacrifice, prophets, the eternal struggle between good and evil, and the existence of angels or spiritual intermediaries existed in African traditions long before Hebrew monotheism formalized them. This shows that many core elements of Western religious thought have roots in African spirituality. The influence was subtle yet pervasive. Rituals, symbols, and moral frameworks traveled across regions and cultures, blending with local beliefs, and eventually shaping global religious narratives. Recognizing this lineage not only illuminates the depth of African spiritual wisdom, but also challenges the notion that later religions emerged in isolation. By tracing these connections, we see that ideas we often take for granted, resurrection, divine justice, prophetic guidance, have far older origins, reminding us that spirituality is a shared human journey, and that Africa's contributions to religious thought have been foundational, even if they were overlooked or intentionally erased over time. Suppression, erasure, and misrepresentation. Despite the richness of African spiritual traditions, much of this knowledge was systematically suppressed. Colonial and Abrahamic powers sought to silence oral traditions, destroy sacred texts, and dismantle temples, shrines, and ritual objects that connected communities to their gods. These actions were not accidental. They were deliberate efforts to erase spiritual independence and replace indigenous beliefs with foreign religious narratives. African gods, once revered as powerful forces guiding daily life, were demonized and labeled as idols or devils, stripping people of their ancestral connection and instilling fear of their own spirituality. The erasure extended beyond physical destruction. Outsiders' written records often misrepresented beliefs, recording practices through a biased lens that misunderstood or deliberately distorted the original meaning. Stories were rewritten, symbols misinterpreted, and moral frameworks judged as primitive or heretical. Over time, entire generations grew up with a version of history that painted their own traditions as inferior, creating confusion and loss of identity. Yet, despite these efforts, fragments survived, hidden in secret societies, oral storytelling and rituals carried quietly from one generation to the next. Today, uncovering these suppressed practices is not just an act of historical curiosity, It's a reclaiming of cultural memory, spiritual autonomy, and ancestral wisdom that was nearly lost. Understanding this suppression allows us to see how powerful forces shaped the way religion and spirituality have been perceived, reminding us of the resilience and enduring influence of African spiritual traditions. In African spiritual traditions, deities were not distant figures. They were living archetypes, embodiments of nature, cosmic forces, and human experience. The sun god represented the supreme life force, illuminating the world, energizing crops, and sustaining all living beings. His presence symbolized vitality, power, and divine authority, reminding communities of the balance and order within creation. The moon goddess governed cycles, intuition, and the mysterious rhythms of life. Her influence was seen in the phases of the moon, the tides, and the subtle energies that guide decisions, emotions, and dreams. Then there was the primordial mother goddess, the ultimate source of creation, wisdom, and transformation. She embodied nurturing, fertility, and the infinite potential of life, guiding people through birth, growth, and spiritual awakening. Each deity was intricately connected, maintaining cosmic balance and harmony. Rituals, prayers, and ceremonies were designed to honor these forces, align human life with natural cycles, and seek guidance from their divine energy. These archetypes weren't just spiritual symbols. They were frameworks for understanding the universe, morality, and the human condition. By connecting with these deities, people cultivated awareness of their place within the cosmos, respect for nature, and reverence for ancestral wisdom. Even today, these archetypal forces resonate in art, music, and spiritual practices worldwide, reflecting a profound understanding of life, transformation, and the interconnectedness of all existence. Ancient oral traditions. In the heart of ancient African spiritual systems, knowledge was not written, it was spoken, sung, and performed. Religion was passed orally through stories, songs, and ritual practices, making the spoken word a powerful vessel for wisdom. Elders served as living libraries, their memories holding centuries of accumulated knowledge, guiding communities with lessons embedded in myth, history, and moral teachings. Rhythm and dance were more than artistic expression. They were mnemonic tools that helped preserve complex ideas, genealogies, and spiritual laws. Each drumbeat, each gesture, and each song encoded lessons that could be recalled and transmitted across generations. This oral culture created an immersive experience, where learning was participatory and deeply connected to the senses and emotions. Children absorbed wisdom naturally by listening, observing, and imitating, becoming part of a continuum that linked past, present, and future. Oral traditions also ensured adaptability. Unlike written texts, stories and songs could evolve, integrating new experiences while maintaining core spiritual truths. Through this dynamic system, entire communities shared a collective consciousness, bound together by ritual, narrative, and memory. Even today, echoes of these oral traditions survive in storytelling, music, and ceremonial practices across Africa and the diaspora. They remind us that knowledge and spirituality are living, breathing forces, preserved not on paper but in the hearts and actions of people who embody and transmit it from one generation to the next. The physical remnants of ancient African spiritual traditions offer powerful testimony to the depth and organization of these societies. Across Nubia, Kush, Egypt, and sub-Saharan regions, temples, pyramids, sculptures, and sacred ritual tools reveal that structured priesthoods and ceremonial practices existed long before the worship of Yahweh emerged. These structures weren't mere monuments. They were centers of learning, spirituality, and cosmic alignment, built to honor deities, ancestors, and natural forces. Stone carvings and cave paintings provide vivid glimpses into the rituals, daily life, and beliefs of ancient communities. Sacred symbols etched into walls, Objects and monuments served as a visual language that communicated spiritual laws, moral guidance, and ancestral wisdom. Archaeologists studying these artifacts have found consistent patterns of symbolism, showing continuity across regions and centuries, proving that African spiritual systems were highly sophisticated and deeply rooted in cosmology and ethics. Even ceremonial tools, from intricate masks to ritual instruments, highlight a level of craftsmanship and understanding of energy, rhythm, and symbolism that is remarkable. Together, these tangible pieces of history affirm that spirituality was intertwined with governance, education, and social life, guiding communities in balance, morality, and harmony with nature. By examining these remnants, we not only understand the religious life of ancient Africa, but also appreciate how much of this knowledge influenced later civilizations. These archaeological findings remind us that African spirituality was organized, profound, and foundational, offering insights into humanity's earliest engagement with the divine. In the early spiritual systems of Africa, religion was richly polytheistic, honoring many gods who reflected aspects of a single, universal life force. Each deity represented a distinct force of nature or human experience: fertility, death, love, war, wisdom. Yet all were interconnected, forming a harmonious, spiritual ecosystem. This approach embraced diversity, allowing communities to relate to the divine through multiple perspectives, while maintaining a recognition of a unified cosmic source. Over time, however, external powers, including Hebrew traditions, later Christianity, and Islam, imposed strict monotheism. These systems emphasized a singular, centralized deity, often dismissing or demonizing the multiplicity of African gods. This shift did more than change theology. It erased symbolic richness, spiritual diversity, and the nuanced understanding of life's interconnected forces. The vibrant tapestry of African spirituality, once expressed through rituals, stories, and gods embodying natural and cosmic powers, was simplified and overwritten. By exploring this contrast, we gain insight into how cultural and religious hegemony reshaped spiritual landscapes, while also appreciating the depth, complexity, and resilience of the original African polytheistic traditions that continue to echo in rituals, stories, and diasporic practices today. Survival in diaspora. Even in the face of relentless suppression, African spiritual traditions proved remarkably resilient. When enslaved Africans were forcibly brought to the Americas and the Caribbean, they carried with them not only their physical strength, but also their gods, rituals, and spiritual knowledge. In these new lands, far from their ancestral homes, they found ways to preserve and adapt their practices under the watchful eyes of colonial powers and Christian missionaries. This gave rise to religions such as Vodun, Santeria, Candomblé, and Umbanda, faiths that blended African spirituality with local cultures and Catholic symbolism. One striking adaptation was the use of Christian saints as covers for African deities, allowing practitioners to continue honoring their gods while appearing to conform to imposed religions. Drumming, dance, ceremonial attire, and oral storytelling became powerful tools to transmit ancestral wisdom and maintain spiritual continuity. Despite centuries of oppression, these traditions survived underground, often in secret gatherings and family rituals. Today, they stand as living testaments to cultural resilience, creativity, and the enduring strength of African spirituality. They are more than religious systems. They are living histories, connecting diasporic communities to their roots, ancestors, and the cosmic energies that shape their understanding of the universe. By studying and acknowledging these practices, we not only honor the past, but also recognize the profound influence African spirituality has had on the cultural, musical, and religious landscapes of the Americas and beyond. The sacred feminine central to many ancient African spiritual traditions was the reverence for the sacred feminine. The mother goddess and feminine energy were honored as sources of life, wisdom, healing, and transformation. Women held powerful roles as spiritual leaders, healers, and guides, overseeing rituals, maintaining sacred knowledge, and connecting communities to divine forces. Their leadership was not just symbolic, it was functional, shaping the moral, social, and spiritual fabric of society. Through ceremonies, dances, and teachings, women transmitted ancestral wisdom, fostered communal harmony, and guided individuals through life's transitions. However, as external influences such as Abrahamic religions and patriarchal systems spread across Africa, the central role of women in spirituality was systematically diminished. Female deities were downplayed, and women were often excluded from positions of authority within religious hierarchies. Despite this suppression, traces of the sacred feminine survived in oral traditions, rituals, and cultural practices, influencing spiritual expressions in diasporic religions and modern African communities. Today, rediscovering the sacred feminine allows us to reclaim lost wisdom, understand the balance between masculine and feminine energies, and appreciate the integral role of women in shaping spiritual life. It reminds us that spirituality is not solely dominated by male perspectives, but is enriched by the nurturing, creative, and transformative power that women embody, a power that has persisted quietly, waiting to be acknowledged, honored, and fully reintegrated into contemporary understanding of African spirituality. Much of Africa's spiritual heritage was obscured or deliberately erased due to colonialism, missionary activity, and the rewriting of history. Indigenous religions, rich with gods, rituals, and cosmological understanding, were often marginalized, dismissed as primitive, or labeled as idolatrous by outsiders. Sacred texts were destroyed, oral traditions disrupted, and temples or shrines were dismantled. Despite these efforts to suppress them, many beliefs survived in secret, preserved orally, or subtly integrated into new religious frameworks. For example, African spiritual practices were often blended into Christian and Islamic rituals, creating syncretic traditions that allowed communities to maintain ancestral connections under the guise of dominant religions. Storytelling, music, dance, and ceremonial objects became tools of preservation, encoding spiritual wisdom in ways that could evade suppression. These hidden traditions served as a lifeline for cultural continuity, ensuring that core teachings about morality, cosmic order, ancestor veneration, and spiritual energy were passed down through generations. Understanding what was hidden from history is essential because it reveals the resilience and adaptability of African spiritual systems. It reminds us that much of what we accept as historical fact has been shaped by dominant powers, and that the true depth of African spirituality often exists beneath the surface, waiting to be rediscovered. By uncovering these suppressed narratives, we not only reclaim cultural heritage but also gain insight into a worldview where humans, nature, and the cosmos are deeply interconnected, and where wisdom has been preserved despite centuries of marginalization. The Kenite hypothesis suggests that the worship of Yahweh may not have originated with the Israelites themselves, but rather came to them through Kenite or Midianite groups from the region east of the Gulf of Aqaba. This idea challenges traditional narratives, proposing that Yahweh had deeper, older cultural and religious roots outside of Canaanite society. Archaeological evidence, combined with linguistic and historical studies, hints at influences from nomadic Midianite tribes who may have transmitted early Yahweh worship to the emerging Israelite community. These groups likely carried their own spiritual practices, rituals, and conceptions of a supreme deity, which later merged with Israelite religious developments. Understanding this connection helps illuminate how early monotheistic ideas evolved, and how African and Near Eastern spiritual traditions may have intermingled, influencing the shaping of Hebrew monotheism. The Kenite hypothesis also raises questions about the origins of biblical narratives, suggesting that what became central to Israelite religion could have been adapted from older, non-Israelite traditions. Recognizing these roots provides insight into the dynamic and interconnected nature of ancient spirituality, where ideas and gods traveled across regions, influencing emerging faiths. This perspective allows us to see Yahweh not merely as a uniquely Israelite invention, but as part of a larger, multicultural religious tapestry, connected to older Near Eastern and African traditions that predated the canonical texts of the Bible. Black Hebrew and Afro-Israelite movements assert that Black people, especially those in the diaspora, are descendants of the ancient Israelites. These movements arose as a way to reclaim history, identity, and spiritual heritage, challenging traditional narratives that have often excluded African contributions to biblical history. Central to some of these movements, like the Nation of Yahweh, is the belief that biblical prophets, and even God, or Yahweh, were Black. This perspective emphasizes a spiritual and cultural continuity that links contemporary African-descended communities to the ancient stories of the Bible. Followers use this belief to cultivate pride, reclaim lost heritage, and reconnect with ancestral wisdom that colonial and religious forces attempted to erase. Through rituals, teachings, and community gatherings, these movements reinforce a sense of belonging and identity, rooted in both African history and biblical tradition. While controversial to mainstream religious scholars, these movements highlight the importance of perspective, representation, and the reclaiming of spiritual narratives. By examining Black Hebrew and Afro-Israelite movements, we gain insight into how communities reinterpret religious texts and traditions to reflect their lived experiences and cultural heritage, asserting that the story of God and the Israelites is not solely a distant historical account, but a narrative intimately connected to the Black diaspora. Even as colonial and religious powers sought to suppress African spiritual traditions, many beliefs survived through a process known as syncretism, the blending of indigenous practices with Christian and Muslim rituals. This adaptation allowed communities to maintain ancestral connections while outwardly conforming to imposed religious systems. For example, African deities and spirits were sometimes represented through Christian saints or Islamic symbols, ensuring that rituals, prayers, and ceremonial practices could continue in secret. Beyond syncretism, secret societies, traditional healers, and shamans played a crucial role in preserving spiritual knowledge underground. These practitioners acted as custodians of sacred wisdom, teaching rituals, herbal medicine, and spiritual guidance to trusted members of the community. Festivals, dances, and ceremonies often contained hidden meanings, encoding moral, cosmic, and ancestral knowledge within seemingly ordinary cultural practices. By blending old traditions with new frameworks, African communities preserved continuity and identity across generations, protecting spiritual systems from eradication. Understanding syncretism reveals the resilience, creativity, and adaptability of African spirituality, showing that even under extreme oppression, spiritual knowledge survived and evolved. Today, these hidden threads of ancestral wisdom can still be traced in Afro-Caribbean, African-American, and African diasporic religious practices, highlighting a legacy of resistance, continuity, and the enduring power of belief. Syncretism not only safeguarded spiritual practices but also created vibrant cultural expressions that continue to shape identity, community, and spiritual life worldwide. African spiritual and cultural systems were far more than religious practices. They shaped the very fabric of society. Belief systems influenced ethics, law, governance, cosmology, art, and music, integrating spiritual understanding into daily life. Ancestors were seen as living guides, acting as mediators between the physical world and the spirit realm, offering wisdom, protection, and insight. Rituals and ceremonies were carefully designed to maintain cosmic balance, foster community harmony, and guide individuals through life's milestones, from birth and initiation to marriage, leadership, and death. Music, dance, and symbolic art were not mere decoration. They carried encoded moral teachings, historical memory, and spiritual power, ensuring that knowledge was transmitted across generations. Community participation in these practices strengthened social bonds, reinforced shared values, and preserved ancestral knowledge. Even in the face of suppression, colonization, and religious conversion, these spiritual and cultural systems persisted, embedding resilience and continuity within African societies. Today, understanding the spiritual and cultural significance of these traditions reveals a worldview where humans, nature, and the cosmos are interconnected, and where rituals, art, and music serve as powerful tools for social cohesion, guidance, and the preservation of collective memory. This legacy highlights the enduring wisdom and sophistication of African civilizations and their lasting influence on the spiritual and cultural life of communities worldwide. Studying ancient African spiritual traditions comes with unique challenges. Many of these systems were passed down orally, leaving no written texts for scholars to analyze. Instead, researchers rely on archaeology, linguistics, mythology, and anthropology to piece together a picture of beliefs, rituals, and societal structures. While these methods provide valuable insight, they also have limitations. Archaeological evidence can be incomplete, linguistic connections sometimes speculative, and mythological interpretations vary widely. Adding to the complexity, historical sources, often written by outsiders, colonial administrators, or missionaries, can be biased or misrepresent African traditions, labeling them as primitive or idolatrous. These distortions have influenced mainstream narratives, making it harder for scholars to reconstruct authentic histories. Despite these hurdles, careful analysis and cross-disciplinary research are helping to uncover the depth, sophistication, and spiritual richness of African civilizations. Understanding these challenges reminds us why much of this knowledge was hidden or suppressed, and why reclaiming it requires critical thinking, cultural sensitivity, and respect for oral traditions that have preserved wisdom across centuries. Why forbidden? The term forbidden reflects how ancient African spiritual knowledge was deliberately suppressed, lost, or labeled taboo by dominant religious and colonial powers. Practices, rituals, and beliefs that predated Yahweh-centered monotheism were often dismissed as primitive or heretical, preventing communities from openly